Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Tiego Thotse. Tiego, how are you? How's it up there in Polokwane?
I'm doing good, thanks. And how are you, Nick? Good afternoon, Sara. It's
I'm
quite
pretty
sunny
good.
this side, yet windy at the same time.
Good old August weather, and of course, also Sara. Sara, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. Despite the husky voice, just ignore that. It's last week's cold.
Well, I think actually I've been told that my voice sounds better when I have a cold, so I don't know. Maybe this is a good thing, a blessing in disguise. All right, let's get
Maybe
into our. Go ahead, Sara.
No. I was going to say maybe me as
too.
well.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into our first story of today, and this is about a scandal, which is coming out of Tembisa Hospital. So, just as a reminder, Tembisa Hospital has been, shall we say, under a bit of a cloud of suspicion because a large amount of strange expenditure was detected by a whistleblower in the health department, Babita Diokran, and then she got assassinated by someone. Anyway, so that already raises a whole bunch of red flags, but we've seen yet another one raised, and this time by the DA's Gauteng Shadow Health MEC, Jack Bloom, who said that the hospital had put in a purchase for, among other things, luxury armchairs, overpriced hand towels, as well as 200 pairs of skinny jeans. In total, 200 items were bought for 2,500 rand each per pair of jeans. What's even more suspicious is that, according to procurement rules, the hospital CEO doesn't have to go through the normal procurement process so long as the purchase of any product is under 500,000 rand. Well, this purchase of skinny jeans came in at 498,000 rand, one pair of jeans short of the 500,000 rand purchase. The company who sold these jeans also has only been in existence for 1 month before the deal was signed with the hospital. And there are lots of rumors that an enormous amount of money has been made out of this. Apparently, Tembisa Hospitals in total has been flagged for spending allegedly 180 million rand in fraudulent, possibly fraudulent payments. Sara, what do you make of this?
What I make of it, I think we've talked earlier, and I think one would call it a human rights infringement, or whatever the right term is. I was doing a program this morning on a radio station where we were highlighting crisis of health in the Eastern Cape, and I think the conclusion I came to is that the ANC, if one could forbid a political party from managing a function like health, the ANC should be out in the cold, because so much is so wrong. And I mean, you don't have to be a genius to know that whatever amount of money you have to get authority for, you don't have to get authority for. You do not buy however many pairs of skinny jeans for children, let alone, I think it was 230 rand per hand towel. What's particularly egregious about this is that when you look at the commitment to health and the fact that health is such a fundamental issue, a fundamental thing to provide to the people that you supposedly serve. I mean, this is outrageous to the point of you almost can't discuss it anymore. But I mean, look at the examples I had from the Eastern Cape, and you have to lay the blame at the fact, and it keeps coming up, that people who manage do not know how to manage. They literally don't know how to manage. What the hell are they doing in these positions? Hospitals are falling apart. Doctors are struggling to get things they need to do their job. Nurses are giving up because of exhaustion. Tensions are rising. And as these things seep out and more, an oncologist leaves or a neurologist leaves, or et cetera, there are fewer people to do more work. And then you can't get medication. And then you can't get this. And then this ICU piece of equipment isn't repaired and it lies there for 2 years. And then the reason they gave, and this is just symptomatic, the reason they gave for the crisis in the Eastern Cape was medico-legal claims. Now, let's put it this way. If you will not budget for your medico-legal claims, so you have to draw from your budget on everything else to pay, your system is going to collapse. And the more your system collapses, the more medico-legal claims there are going to be. And apparently Treasury has said, budget specifically for your medico-legal claims so that you don't have to eat a no. So I can only assume, I mean, this is an area of cadre deployment that is, there should be a special place in hell reserved for the ANC that treats the provision of health in this way. And this sort of malfeasance, I mean, we've had PPE stolen in vast amounts in the last couple of years while the Zondo Commission was going on. I can only assume that the guy who runs Tembisa thinks that, well, whatever silly thing he does isn't a problem because he will be protected. I mean, it's the only assumption I can come to. So maybe the only good thing about this is that there will never be an NHI. There can't be.
Well, we can only hope so, because the consequences of connecting these networks of corruption into the private health insurance industry, you know, that suddenly the feeding frenzy will be out of control. Tiego, what do you make of all this?
If there's one thing that will make people immigrate, it's insecurity about the provision of health. So.
Indeed. And of course, it is essentially a tax on the kind of middle class and lower middle class, because there will probably still be high quality healthcare options available and health insurance packages available for very wealthy people. And everyone else will just have to basically be allowed to do only what the government says that they can do and is willing to pay for. One of the things that strikes me, Tiego, about this is, once again, we've got an example of lots of rules in place for preventing corruption, lots of regulations, lots of procedures must be filled out like this, and people just ignore them, or they just make ridiculous claims. I remember, so we've got the skinny jeans here for 498,000 Rand, but I remember a case from a few years ago where a stapler was purchased for, I think it was 20,000 Rand just by itself, for a single stapler, which is so obviously hiding some kind of corruption. What do you make of all this, Tiego?
Well, I think that, like we've discussed before, we are governed by a criminal party, really. We must be honest about this one, that the African National Congress no longer is a political party, but a criminal syndicate, right? So what these guys have done is that they've mastered the systems in departments, in municipalities, and everywhere else. Precisely what happened here is what happens every day, is probably what's happening in a department or municipality right here next to me at this current moment. They are looking at the budget for a tender, how much the tender is for, how much they can keep their prices at. So they remove the tender from being a tender and authorize it themselves and chow from that. But as well, what they do as well is that they open processes for tenders, allow everyone to submit their applications. Then once everyone has submitted at night, they convene and meet, bring in new applications, having looked at the other applications and their prices, bring the prices below. So this really is the African National Congress at play. The CEO is most probably, actually definitely, a deployee of the ANC. It's really just the criminal syndicate going on. And all we can really do is to hope that South African citizens open their eyes ahead of 2024 and vote out criminals and vote in a better people who can better govern the state and not steal money that should be allocated for service delivery.
So I'm reminded again of what I think is one of your best insights, which is that if you actually, to fix some of these institutions, you often just need to start by following the rules, follow the disciplinary processes, investigate the blatantly obvious corruption. You don't need to dig deeply. Prosecute people who are found to be wrong, or fire them. At the very least, fire them, even if they don't end up going to jail. At least they're not going to be in the public service. Any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on exactly that, and just to show you how actually you've got to clean out the system in its entirety at provincial level. The guys on top. One of the hospitals that was running fairly well in the Eastern Cape had a manager, an MD, I don't know what the position was called, who's running it, and they had doctors with all sorts of qualifications, etc. He'd come in and started to uncover and was going to deal with 100 cases of known theft. The unions, who represented the employees who were going to see their asses, forced them out. I mean, literally forced them out. And although a hearing later established that, you know, the management and the doctors were absolutely correct and in the clear, they didn't go back. They didn't choose to go back. Now, funny enough, that's particularly, I would be particularly keen to know who those unions are, because I think not enough stink can be made about that issue. Their role is to support their members through a hearing, not to threaten the management not to hold the hearings. But you see, again, there's all sorts of networks, but I think the union movement, it gets away with a lot of sort of high-handed words, but not much in the way of really impressive deeds. And I look forward to hearing which ones these are.
Indeed, and actually that is a great segue because, you know, once again, that story you just told is a great example of the nexus that has dominated South African policy and politics for the last sort of 30 years or so, and that is the alliance between big business, big government, big labor, and the accommodation of big business that bends the knee within that cluster. And it has been disastrous for competence, for political stability, for economic growth. And the sooner it is washed away, the better. But speaking of unions, we did talk about this last week a bit, but there is a planned national shutdown tomorrow. This is, of course, it was originally called for by the South African Federation of Trade Unions, or SAFTU, which is one of the most prominent members, as well as Zimbabwe. And they are planning to address the steep increases to the cost of standard basic food basket, electricity tariffs, petrol, transport costs, interest rates, and financial liabilities. They claim that they have been joined by, quote, 200 working class formations and pro-worker NGOs, which, as well as they are also being supported by the EFF, the PAC, and AZAPO, as well as the Workers' and Socialist Party. The only one of those that has any real presence, of course, is the EFF. They've also been joined, I believe, by COSATU, who last week said that us too. Also, we are also doing a national shutdown at the same time, by the way. But we're not part of that group. We're out doing our own thing. which is, I think, yet again, another great example of the silliness of the inter-union rivalries that we see in the country. There are, I think, marches planned in a number of provinces: Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, Free State, Eastern Cape, Western Cape, but not, interestingly, in KZN, as well as the northwest of the Northern Cape. And Zwelin Zimbabwe claims that small black business, including taxi associations, truck owners, and drivers, are all set to join in the marches. Tiego, what do you make of this and what the strikers are protesting for?
Well, I think it's nonsense. I saw that one of their demands is that the grant for unemployed people should be increased to 1,500, and about 12.4 million people should be gotten onto this grant. Where is that money going to come from? And if these people really have the energy to go fill up the streets, protesting, marching, and everything together with people who are not employed, they should probably go into villages and everywhere else, allocate land together with the king, and teach these people how to farm and everything. Already, this very amount that's being given to the unemployed is already ridiculous. We can't be paying people for sitting down, whereas there is a lot of things that people could be doing in this country at this point in time. But I think the problem started in 94 when the ANC came in and promised people ridiculous things. And people have this idea that the economy of South Africa will build itself, that the government will build the economy by themselves. the reality is that the people must work. People must work, and the government must do the right things on its part as well. That's how we get to grow the economy. Now, you can't be sitting down every day, not working at all, having been allocated, it's such as people in rural areas who've been allocated farming land. You've been allocated that land by the king, you're not using that land, but yet you are here now demanding that you must be given 1,500. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense at all. And if they do want to make any progressive suggestions around how the government can move things forward in a progressive manner, then they can do that in writing. Some of these leaders are friends with the president, friends with the ANC. Some of them are in fact ANC people. So there's really no need for this protest at all. That's my take really around the matter.
So I think, of course, that's one of the key points here is Sara, the unions have tried to frame this as some sort of part of the great anti-capitalist struggle. But once again, it's just government must double down on the things it's been doing for years. Government is also not really the problem. The real problem is some sort of nefarious element here. The real problem is just that government hasn't been hard enough on business. What do you?
Well, essentially, I mean, the irony is that the people marching would have the same economic policies, philosophies as the ANC. In other words, socialist moving to Marxist. So that's not an issue, although they pretend it is an issue because they're unhappy about what's happening. But they would pursue exactly the same sort of policies. But worse than that, and again, I think I'm having a union day. I want COSATU to explain how it can go on a strike, well, as David says, disrupting the economy in order to disrupt the economy, essentially. I wanted them to explain if they feel so strongly that their members have been hard done by and on the receiving end of an unfair economic situation. All of us have been on an unfair economic situation. Why is COSATU in government? And of course, this has been an issue that's actually raised itself for years, and that is that there's always a tension between unions that are aligned to political parties. England, one used to see it particularly in the 70s, in the 70s in particular, where the last time you really saw that tight result. Here you have that SACP, ANC, COSATU. COSATU whinges every now and again, but to go on strike against essentially yourself is not just apparently idiotic, but it's morally bankrupt. Because if you take that principle to stand, you should break away from the tripartite alliance. It's that big an issue, surely, that you should actually choose to break away. So I think when it comes to the level of really concern about people and the preparedness to manage the areas that you are responsible for, COSATU is not in a lot of better position than the ANC and the SACP at the moment. And I agree with Tiego, 2024 is a very good opportunity to see a change in government.
Right, and once again, as I said, we have this rivalry between the unions where it's sort of COSATU is kind of trying to follow along with SAFTU, and everyone is trying to be more communist than the last, and it sort of all just ends up in a bit of a nihilistic squash. But once again, this is governments govern and represent the voters, and unions represent the workers and are supposed to fight for them. They're not the same thing. They shouldn't be in government together. And for a surprising amount of time, and you can see this all the time with the SACP too, right? Every election they always go. Our colleague Marius always points this out. They always say, "No, don't worry. We've had it with the ANC. We're going to run as an independent party," and then nothing happens, and then they end up endorsing the ANC. And COSATU, as you say, Sara, it's exactly the same, right? It does the same sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But I think what's perhaps worth recognizing is how groups like SAFTU and the EFF are playing a very similar sort of game, which is that they still live completely within the COSATU, ANC, SACP world, even though they pretend to be in opposition to it. Tiego, do you agree with me on that last point? And do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, no, I agree with you completely on that point. My final thoughts would just be that, look, taxes are already too high in South Africa. We citizens already have a lot on our hands and everything. So there's few of us paying taxes who are employed, and more people who are not employed who are not paying taxes. We really need for the people to start working. These protests are not going to assist at all. We need for the people to start working, being creative, finding ways of generating an income. Like I've said before, it doesn't even have to be an employment issue whereby someone must come and employ you. I've made an example about land in rural areas that's available to anyone who stays in those areas from the kings. People must start working and understand that this economy will not build itself. And also that it's not the single responsibility of the government to get this economy going. We each have a responsibility and a role to play in getting the economy of this country going forward. But more than anything, I think tomorrow, the irony of tomorrow's protest is that we find ourselves in this negative economic situation. And tomorrow, what's essentially going to happen is that production at most companies is going to stop. And that will only result in us being in a further crisis. So we really need to rethink how we do things. Our leaders need to sit down and assess things thoroughly before they call for protests like this one.
Well said. All right, let's move on to our next topic. And this is, of course, about the one of the things that is blamed by government and unfortunately by many South Africans for unemployment and lack of economic opportunity, and that is foreign immigration. Of course, it's now I think it's currently still before the courts, but the Minister of Home Affairs decided that these Zimbabwean Exemption Permits, which were instituted in 2009, supposedly as a temporary measure to essentially kind of regularize Zimbabweans who had been forced to flee the country due to its terrible economic circumstances. And it comes to South Africa, some of them legally, some of them not so legally. This was a relatively easy to get visa, which was supposed to kind of get everyone registered and to help expedite the process of moving towards permanent residence. There are 178,000 permit holders of the ZEP, Zimbabwe Exemption Permit. And the minister says that he's going to go ahead despite the court challenge from the Helen Suzman Foundation with cancelling the ZEP in December, and that only 6,000 of the 178,000 permit holders had responded to his call for Zimbabweans to state their case before the dispensation lapses, and that this wasn't sufficient. That a spokesperson for the Department of Home Affairs went on to say that there's been plenty of opportunity for Zimbabweans with the ZEP to regularize themselves, to get permanent residence documents and become fully normalized immigrants, and that they mustn't complain because time's up and this was always going to be a temporary measure. So, Sara, let me start with you. What do you make of those claims in particular, and what are your thoughts on this whole issue? Because obviously, we do have an enormous amount of immigration to the country, and quite a lot of it is illegal. But at the same time, I'm not quite sure if the ZEP, cancelling the ZEP, is really going to fix things.
Well, let's say on a human rights level, it's probably egregious. We were talking earlier about the Department of Health, and now let's talk about the Department of Home Affairs, because you're looking at a period of over 10 years where people are on these renewable permits. Now, in any sort of normal country, you would, if you say, you must sort out your status, otherwise, eventually, at some point, these permits will expire and you'll have to go back to Zimbabwe. Now, first of all, if you're going to do that, you've got to be prepared to follow the process properly, allow people to do that, and not wait for over 10 years before you say, this is it, we're now going to chuck you out. And then, of course, it's a point that the discussion we had earlier, and that is, I think we all know somebody who has all the right credentials for staying in the country and for moving to permanent resident status. The only thing standing between them and resident status at the Department of Home Affairs is somewhere between 10 and 20,000 Rand. So it's very likely that a great many of the people who have not come forward to take advantage of Dr. Motsoaledi's generous offer either don't have the money, or because they don't have the money, they know they are going to be pursued and highlighted. It's one of those things. It's one of those things which we really somehow we can't run. We're bureaucratic, but we can't run the bureaucracy properly. It stretches over years. There's bribes involved, And therefore, it's very difficult to get people to do the right thing. And this whole cycle goes on and on. But, I mean, for sheer humanitarianism, we look to our favorite minister, suddenly got a first name, Lindiwe Zulu. She says that, well, countries have got to look after their own. It's saying essentially that, Zimbabweans must be looked after by Zimbabwe. What do I say?
Right. And so, I mean, I just fail to see how this is really going to improve things, because the borders are still just as porous and as badly policed as they've been for a while now. The things that are driving people from Africa, particularly from places like Zimbabwe to South Africa. I mean, Zimbabwe, I think, had inflation of it's gone back up to 200% or something.
Yeah.
So the things that are pushing Zimbabweans to come to this country to look for work, to find opportunities, have not gone away. I think the only people who are going to benefit from making more Zimbabwean immigrants illegal are those who are at Home Affairs or are in the police service and are going to be able to collect a lot more bribe money because they're going to have a lot more victims. I don't know. Tiego, do you agree with me? What's your take on this issue?
No, I absolutely agree with you, Nick. The things that are making people leave Zimbabwe, the situation is still bad. People are still leaving the country. Our borders are still not strong. So the question that comes to mind really is, what will happen to the 100 and something thousand Zimbabweans who did not reach out to the minister if they do not reach out to the minister by December? Are they going to deport them home? If they do deport them home, they are currently deporting people home every day, and some of the people still manage to come into the country. So it's the whole process is then useless. We are really just going to waste state resources here, deporting Zimbabweans home, them just coming back into the country. Let's rather just register them, let them be in the country, extend their permits. Then you know who's in the country legally. When we work around our budget, when we work around when there's crime, for those who cry about crime, that often there's crime and you find fingerprints, but you can't locate the person because they are not registered. So we can deal with such matters. I think it's more productive to do that than to want to deport them home, whereas we know the situation is bad and most, if not many, will still come back into the country.
Right, and of course, I feel a particular kinship with Zimbabwe, not simply because I know quite a lot of Zimbabweans, but because I feel like South Africa really has had a part to play in legitimizing the ZANU-PF regime, in keeping it in power, in not putting the pressure on it to reform properly, and as a result, perpetuating Zimbabwe's misery. After all, it was remember Thabo Mbeki's crisis, what crisis, and then his incredibly shaky sort of power sharing agreement in Zimbabwe when ZANU-PF had pretty clearly lost that election to the MDC. South Africa should have stood on the side of democracy there, and maybe there would have been an opportunity for reform. And perhaps things would be better in Zimbabwe and fewer Zimbabweans would want to come here. But that didn't happen. We supported the immiseration of Zimbabweans, and the result is we now have to deal with that consequence. Sara, any final thoughts from you?
I think the importance of that point is that whenever one talks of the Mbeki era, one talks of two great crises, the things that he will never be forgiven for. HIV/AIDS is the one, and the propping up of the Mugabe regime in Zimbabwe was the other one. One can only imagine how different history would have been had that election been called as it was and Mbeki thrown his weight behind the change. So as you say, we're largely responsible for it. And some of the criminals here are Zimbabweans, but a lot of the very hardworking people here are Zimbabweans too. So you can't base anything on that. But it also indicates that the government departments act in such silos that the point that Tiego makes about being registered, being on record, being able to follow up, there seems to be no ability to look across at competencies within government and say, well, we could have this information, the police could use it. That sort of thing, that sort of, not even cooperation, just that information gathering that's reliable and can be used by a government. But frankly, I mean, unless you can do something about corruption and unless you can do something about policing the borders, both of which are interrelated, just right. You may as well try and make a better fist of it as a Department of Home Affairs and a more compassionate one. You don't have to be, just let people in, but make sure that if anyone is found demanding 10,000 rand for a permanent residence permit, they get fired, as we suggested. Never mind be put up before the courts. Just let them get fired.
Yes. Now, that would be a good start. And I think it's very important that citizens demand that of our government. I think that our democracy is about to get a lot more competitive. I think that's definitely the way we're going in 2024. And it's going to be the onus is going to be on voters, on civil society, to make sure that when a new government or even a weakened ANC government comes into power through some sort of coalition, that it's going to have to do so. It's going to have to make some changes, or else it's not going to be in power for very long. And that's kind of how democracy is supposed to work. So I hope that we get to that stage. Anyway, thank you for listening. We hope that you found the show interesting. We will, of course, be back tomorrow. And I hope that you all have a wonderful and magnificent afternoon. Cheers, everyone.